3.1 earthquake strikes, and then a 2.6 just 10 hours later, upstate New York and Medina. And it's an area of an old supervolcano, about 2.5 billion years ago, around the area of Maine. Upstate New York, Maine, around the area of, as we see, Lake Ontario, let's put it that way, upstate New York. Then we had the 3.1 first in Montreal, and then 10 hours later in Medina, upstate New York, on Lake Ontario. And what you're looking at here, this mess here, is actually a formation of various calderas. This is the supervolcano area that struck 2.6 million years ago, full of lava flows, and it's stretching between Ontario, Quebec, upstate New York, around the rivers, around the Great Lakes in that area, which we know are, of course, part of the mantle plume of the mid-continental rift. Let's take a look at the quakes in the area now. Keep this, please, in mind. That red thing is the mantle plume that has magma underneath, and it's basically sitting, that big thick part is sitting on top of the Great Lakes. And the western part goes through Oklahoma to Kansas, all the way to Texas, turning into New Mexico to the west, towards the Valles Caldera. And the eastern part, as we see here, basically flanks the New Madrid seismic zone. New Madrid, as you can see, is between that thing sticking down towards Mississippi River, between the east and the west parts of this mantle plume. Let's take a look at the maps now. What we came up first, 3.1, UTC 721. And this came about 10 hours later, UTC 1704, okay? And that's in Medina, upstate New York, shallow, 5 kilometers depth. And this was in the area just north of Montreal, Messuge, Canada, which is northern part of Montreal, again, 10 kilometers depth, which is, again, shallow. And this is one that we had in basically Maine. They have it in Canada again, but it's basically in Maine. Let's go to the Canadian map, which has more of the, okay, this one here, I don't know if the same one. Sometimes, you know, they have it, the USGS can count it as 3.1. The Canadians have it as 3.6. I have not looked to see if it's the same exact one or if this is perhaps another one. Let's see. Go back to, yeah, it must be Montreal. Sorel-Lacy, Quebec. That must be, I used to live there. I finished high school in Canada. Okay, that looks as if it's northern Montreal. And as you can see, that's Vermont. That's upstate New York. So you can see it's basically on the border. Montreal, I mean, a little bit further down, and you're up in upstate New York. It's a 7-hour drive from New York City. Montreal from New York City is a 7-hour car drive. But let's go to they don't have a shake map, unfortunately. And I'm sure it shook a lot because a lot of people felt it. Reported 1,466 Canadians or whatever, whoever, maybe upstate New York also. This is the stations. 1,466 reported feeling it, so I'm sure many thousands have felt it. So there it is, Montreal, okay? And that's Montpelier, Vermont. That's upstate New York. And so I'm sure this whole area must have shaken because it shook because of that. Going to the map. Again, they don't have the shake map, unfortunately. Tectonics, they don't have tectonics because of the fact that they don't have any. They don't know many fault lines on the East Coast. And historic seismicity, again, they don't plot everything. Population, basically Montreal, that's it right there. That's the St. Lawrence River. And going into Lake Ontario, as you can see right there, that's where we had the Medina earthquake, upstate New York. This is the Finger Lakes. I used to live there in Ithaca, beautiful place. The Finger Lakes, those are the Finger Lakes. And it's basically around here. let's see, I think I plotted that. Let's see. Yes, right there, Medina. And my map keeps on ticking off the pins for some reason. Okay, that's upstate New York, Medina. As you can see, those are the Finger Lakes. And this is the quake in Montreal 3.1. This one was 10 hours later, so it looks like something happened. Maybe the pressure went along this way, because this is the New Madrid seismic zone. It's a rift valley. That part is already cut up to there. That part with the river is already cut up to there. We know, we said already that every river is a fault line, okay? So that's the Mississippi River, and you can see this, that's a river there as well. And it looks like that is the Real Foot Rift Valley. That's a rift valley, and it's splitting. And at one point way in the future, this part will be dislodged towards the east. This is where we saw the mantle plume, right here. And, sorry, okay. And that part here, the western part, goes into the Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and then it swirls towards New Mexico. And we did have a Texas earthquake that shook, as we said before, even Utah. That 5 magnitude earthquake in Texas shook, which was a surprise, shook Utah. And Utah, the 5.7 and the ongoing swarm, I'm sure shook Yellowstone as well. Yellowstone and perhaps even Valles Caldera. I mean, you know, all these 5 magnitude quakes, and the Utah 5.7, you know, upgraded to 6. That's a pretty big earthquake for that area, because that was that lake, Salt Lake City, is on Salt Lake, which is landfill. So anyway, let's not go off on a tangent. Let's go to the okay, they don't have a shake map. And we'll go to the area of the Blake River Mega Caldera Complex, which is a supervolcano. It's a supervolcano due to its great size and its multiple dikes and vents. Okay? The Blake River Mega Caldera Complex is considered a supervolcano. So I'm not making this stuff up. It's a supervolcano. It's one of the biggest eruptions ever. But anyway, Blake River Mega Caldera Complex is a giant sebaceous subaqueous caldera cluster. It's a cluster, or a nested caldera system that spans across Ontario-Quebec border in Canada. The caldera complex is about 2.7 billion years old. That's a greenstone belt. That's another one up there. Okay, look at that. Okay, there you go. Swinging to the through the Great Lakes. Belt spans across Ontario-Quebec border, Canada, mostly made of volcanic rocks. As you can see there, it sort of surrounds Hudson Bay. It also includes ultramafic rocks, mafic intrusions, granitoid rocks, and early and middle Precambrian sediments. Okay, you can see that basically it surrounds Hudson Bay. Okay. It lies within the southern zone, as we said, of the Superior Craton. Is a stable crustal block in Canada covering Quebec, Ontario, southeast Manitoba, and northern Minnesota in the U.S. It's the biggest craton among those formed during the Archean period. Craton is a large part of the Earth's crust that has been stable and subjected to very little geological changes. And it has an area of 1,200 square miles. This Blake River Mega Caldera Complex has been a center of major interest since 2006, with numerous excursions at the international, national, local level. It's a world-class meta-low-tech study of genesis and regional global distribution of mineral deposits. Okay, with respect to the hydrothermal copper and zinc and gold-rich massive sulfides. Now remember copper and zinc. Remember, we talked about this that the ancient Greeks, the Minoans from Crete, came all over from Crete, which is here, that's Greece, that's Crete, and they were trading thousands of years ago. Trading, they would sail through Gibraltar, and they would trade along here, the Iberian Peninsula, and they would trade along here, they would trade along England, and they would go to the Faroe Islands, and then they would go to Iceland, and then they would go to Greenland, and then they would go to Baffin, and then Labrador, and they would come here. And they have found that the Native American Indians of the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River have mitochondrial DNA from the ancient Cretans, the ancient Minoans from Crete. And the fact is that we talked about this. Is fascinating. Anyway, they removed 500,000 tons of copper from those mines there around the Great Lakes. As we said, it's full of copper and iron and gold and various minerals. And what would they want the copper for? Well, you know, they had armor. They had chariots, they had swords, they had lances, they had helmets, shin guards, and they had armor, of course, and their shields. It was the Bronze Age, after all. And they removed 500,000 tons of copper. And the archaeologists recently our paleogeologists, found those mines there with their tools as well. And they figured that they removed at least 500,000 tons of copper. They left some for the baubles for the Native Americans to make little bracelets and necklaces out of. And that's just about it. But the fact that the evidence is that the mitochondrial DNA in the Native American Indians is ancient Greek. And the other cherry on the cake, I have to tell you this because you may not know it, the cherry on the cake was this professor from one of the universities of Maine, Professor Johnston, in May of 1851, wrote a letter to the Indian chiefs, and he wrote the letter in ancient Greek writing, and he wrote to them in ancient Greek. Do you think that the Indian chiefs went to college to learn, university to learn ancient Greek? Were they Hellenists? Were they Grecians? As in the Victorian period or the time of Jane Austen? The gentlemen were Grecians. They learned ancient Greek and Latin. No, this was their native language, and this was their native alphabet, ancient Greek writing. That's why this Professor Johnston wrote to them, warning them of the fact that they should enrich their culture, make sure they keep their culture, because of the influx of the Westerners. They may lose their culture. That's what the letter was all about. And this guy Johnston, the professor from the University of Maine, wrote them that letter in ancient Greek. And he called them Adelphiamu, my brothers, he called them. That's how he was starting every paragraph. My brothers, he called them. Adelphiamu. So that's strange. I mean, okay, so I got off on a tangent, but that was a beautiful tangent, wasn't it? Okay, so we have a supervolcano here, and we have an increased amount of very strong earthquakes. So you remember a couple of months ago we had one in, where was it, Boston, 3.1, that shook Long Island as well. And we've been having quite a few around this area, specifically this area, upstate New York. We even have one in Pittsburgh. We had one in Rhode Island. We had a couple in Maine. We know that Maine has 5 volcanoes. Maine has 5 volcanoes. And this way, 4 of them are in a 100-mile area. And this is the East Coast Seamount. There's 30 volcanoes here. 30 volcanoes. And there is magma around here. A lot of hot magma around here. And there's magma under here. The mid-continental rift, the Keweenaw Fault, the mid-continental rift. There's also magma under the seamount here. Okay, there are some spots in the Carolinas with magma, but this is the one that is really red with magma under here. And going back to our messy map of this full of calderas, this supervolcano. The Blake River Mega Caldera Complex consists of mafic, that is, silicic rock of igneous or igneous rock rich in magnesium and iron, to intermediate volcanic flows and less abundant felsic, described as igneous rock rich in elements feldspar and quartz, in contrast to mafic, so they have both. Volcanic flows and intercalated pyroclastic rocks, we know what they are. There they are. Okay, that's usually when you have snow and the snow melts and it mixes with the ash in the water, it comes out like a really runny, muddy, fast pyroclastic flow composed of volcanic materials, where the volcanic material has been transported and reworked through mechanical ashes. Okay, so it underwent 3 stages of major volcanic activity. The first resulted in the creation of a 50-mile by 25-mile wide Mesema caldera, there it is, which has been dated to about 2.7 million years ago, 2.7 billion years ago. It's a coalescence of at least 2 large mafic shield volcanoes. Shield volcanoes are called shield because they look like a shield. Mauna Loa, for example. Okay? And that formed about 2.7 billion years ago. The second phase resulted in the creation of 19-mile by 9.3-mile wide new Senator caldera, forming at that time, consisting of thick mafic, there we go again, sequences, and a subaqueous volcanic lake. During that early stages of the caldera's development. And the third phase, okay, a little bit earlier. Now, the Blake River Mega Caldera Complex is considered a supervolcano, meaning supervolcano, one of the 20 in the world. It's a large volcano that has had an eruption with a volcanic explosivity index of VI8, the largest recorded value on the index. This means the volume of deposits for that eruption is greater than 1,000 cubic kilometers. So it is a supervolcano with a VI8 due to large size, multiple dikes and vents. The Mesema caldera is in the order of 1.4 to 1.5 square meters, 1,400 to 1,500 square meters, making the complex similar to Yellowstone caldera in Wyoming. Wow! Wow, we learn everything every day. Okay, so this caldera in Quebec is similar to the Yellowstone supervolcano caldera, also the Lake Toba caldera in Indonesia, and strikingly similar structure to the Olympus Mons on Mars. Okay, as a result, the Blake River group is best categorized as a mega-nested caldera complex. So what am I supposed to say? What in future reference? What shall I call this for you so that you don't get upset with me and start saying you're making things up and you're a fearmonger and you're don't make us more frightened than we should be. What am I supposed to call this? Shall I call this the Quebec supervolcano? What should I call this? What should I call this? The Blake River Group supervolcano mega nested caldera complex. What should I call this? Okay, I'm going to call it the Yellowstone-like East Coast supervolcano. That's what I'm going to call it. Yellowstone-like East Coast supervolcano. Okay, so that's what I'm going to call it. The Yellowstone-like East Coast supervolcano. And that's where it is. This is where it is, right here. Mega caldera complex. Complex similar to Yellowstone. I'm not making this up, okay? The size and its dike, and it had a VEI 8, okay? And from what I read previously, this was even bigger than a VEI 8, but because it was such a huge eruption. But anyway, they found, of course, the continents were closer, but they found Maine. Maine is supposed to be part of that supervolcano, Maine. They found Maine lava in the British Isles. They found the eruptions from Maine all the way to the British Isles. We don't know if they must have been much closer, of course, 2.7 billion years ago, but they found that Maine lava, it flung all the way to here, from Maine, all the way to here. And how far is that in miles today? Let me see. In miles, that's roughly from here to here, about 3,000 miles. Okay, so going back to this, I think you read enough from that. Okay, what should we go? Should we go and read a little bit? They're not going to mention supervolcanoes here. People in the large western Quebec seismic zone felt small earthquakes, suffered damages from larger ones for 3 centuries. The 2 largest damaging earthquakes in 1935, magnitude 6.1, at the northwestern end of the seismic zone, and 1732, magnitude 6.2, away at the southeastern end of the zone, where it caused significant damage in Montreal. Earthquakes cause damage in zone about once a decade. Smaller earthquakes felt about three or four times a year. Earthquakes in the Rocky Mountains, less frequent than in the West, although here less frequent in the West, are typically felt over a much broader region. East of the Rockies, the earthquakes can be felt in an area as much as 10 times larger than a similar magnitude earthquake on the West Coast. And of course, the fault lines, they don't know where they are. They're usually deep. Most of the bedrock in Western Quebec seismic zone was formed as several generations of mountains rose and were eroded down again over the last billion years or so. And the well-studied plate boundaries like San Andreas fault system, California, often scientists can determine the name of the specific fault that's responsible for the earthquake. But here in the east of the Rocky Mountains, that's rarely the case. The Western Quebec seismic zone is far from the nearest plate boundaries, which are in the center of the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, we're not talking about plate boundaries. We don't need plate boundaries. They never, ever have talked about the mid-continental rift and the magma plume under there. And we've done many videos of this and shown you maps. And we have to keep in mind that this is a supervolcano. People may say, oh, it's old, it's extinct, it's sleeping, it's asleep. Yeah, but it may be a sleeping Godzilla or a giant. When they say that it's like, where is it? Yellowstone, okay, or Lake Toba, all right? These are strikingly similar in structure to the Olympus Mons, which is what, very large shield volcano on the planet Mars, height of nearly 22 kilometers, and things like that. Okay, we're not going to talk about Mars now. We've already gone on a tangent with the ancient Greeks and the mitochondrial DNA of the Native Americans. So that's it. That's the area right there. And we have the magma, the very large magma body over here, Great Lakes, that horseshoe-shaped mid-continental rift. At one point, Lake Superior was much closer. Superior was much closer to Yellowstone, and because of that rift, the Great Plains have opened up because of the magma underneath. It's a rift valley. So all of you there, please be very careful, because you may be getting more earthquakes. Earthquakes beget more earthquakes. Okay, please be safe, and God bless you all. Thank you for your support.
Thank you.
If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.